Oh, well, that was Andy's way of trying to distance himself from what's about to take place. Andy's not going to be a guy who says, we need to trade for this guy, or we need to trade for that guy, or here's a young player that I've always loved. That's not going to be his thing. But to try to pigeonhole Andy as an old guy, as a guy who hasn't moved with the times, would be totally incorrect. And you got a glimpse of that at that press conference the other day, Mike. Andy has always been an exceptionally bright man who has hired good people and valued information of all sorts. I mean, the one thing that I think people say about him that might concern a franchise that has a lot of big decisions to make in the next few weeks is he's very deliberate. You know, he doesn't like to rush into anything. And so it'll be interesting to see how that part of his equation translates to a team that needs action.
A lot of action. How is this being received around the league? Are people saying, you know what, the Phillies finally took a step in the right direction? And, are people really applauding bringing Andy MacPhail back into Major League Baseball?
Yeah, for the most part. First off, this was not just a name that just magically popped into the heads of John Middleton or his cohorts. What I'm hearing is this came from above, way up above. I mean, the commissioner's office. Andy MacPhail has always been a good soldier and a guy who's been extremely involved in a lot of different things, not just with his clubs, but within Major League Baseball. I mean, he helped negotiate a labor deal with David Montgomery once upon a time. And his family goes back generations in the sport. He's extremely well connected. And I'm convinced that he came with the right rave reviews from all the right places, including the commissioner and the former commissioner. So he had that going for him. The only, the only reservation that I've heard about Andy is, he's a very, I don't want to say a slow-moving guy, but very deliberate, very patient. Very similar to David in that regard. In baseball, sometimes you got to make decisions quick. So I think that's a reservation. The other thing that people who know him wonder about is those 3 years in the game. Have they really fully recharged him? At the end in Baltimore, he admitted this himself the other day. He kind of had that Dick Vermeil burnout thing going. Dick Vermeil came back from his burnout retirement and won a Super Bowl with the Rams. Andy was not real engaged at the end in Baltimore, but he certainly seems like he's going to be highly engaged in Philly, and they need him to be.
Yeah, they sure do, Jay. Jayson Stark's with us, ESPN.com senior baseball writer. So what is his role now? Trade deadline, very important. He's got a GM that is kind of on the clock here, I guess. He said, I'm just going to kind of sit back and observe. And, what is his role between now and the end of the year? How much do you think he'll have, how much say will he have in what happens at this trade deadline?
Well, you and I talked last week about the fact that other teams get the feeling Ruben is not fully in charge, and this goes back even to before Andy. That the decisions, the big baseball decisions, were really being made by Pat Gillick. And so I actually had a chance to talk to Pat about this. We talked about it a little bit, and he said that Ruben will make the deals. But I believe that's Pat just saying what he has to say. I'm convinced that it may be Ruben who is going to make the calls, but he is not going to make the decisions. Pat and Andy are going to be heavily involved, and I think Andy more philosophically than with the details. One of the things I thought was really interesting that he said the other day was that he's very curious about how decisions are made, how when you get into trade talks, people have done their homework and what sort of information and background work they bring to the decisions they make. That is vintage Andy. Andy really, he's extremely thorough, and he's going to want the people around him to be thorough. So, to me, that should be reassuring to people who are concerned about what's coming and the kind of deals they might make for especially somebody like Cole Hamels. This is not going to be a situation where take a couple of names, and, let's do it. It's not going to be the Cliff Lee to Seattle deal. Every name is going to be thoroughly vetted and debated, and I really expect Andy to be right in the middle of that part of it.
And he has some history of trading, especially left-handed pitchers, and they got one on their roster. He has been in the middle of making moves like this before, so you wonder, is he going to have some input this time around? Because, this is a pretty important deal. Yeah,
well, you're referencing Eric Bedard, obviously, and one of the first things that I heard from other teams was, if you go back to that Eric Bedard deal, they didn't trade him in July. And I actually appeared on Jim Duquette's radio show the other day. Jim was the general manager under Andy in Baltimore at that time, and he made the same observation. He said they were getting ready to trade Eric Bedard at the deadline, and he was coming off a year where he led the American League in strikeouts, so he was a big-time arm at that time. And Andy came in and hit the brakes, put the brakes on that, and said, let's not be in a hurry. If we don't get what we want, we don't need to trade him now. We can trade him this winter. We can trade him next year. And as it turned out, they traded him in December. They did not trade him in July. And, I've had some clubs ask me, do I think that's going to happen here? Now, the Phillies people say totally different situation. But it's something to watch because, as I've told you, next winter is going to be an extremely difficult environment to try to trade an ace. This is the time. If they don't trade him in July, I think we'll be sitting here 1 year from now having this exact conversation. Now, you don't need me to go through all the aces who are going to be free agents this winter, but Price, Cueto, Zimmerman, Greinke, that would start the list. I mean, you think back to last year, the free agent ace landscape never cleared, never gave the Phillies an opportunity to trade Cole Hamels because there were so many alternatives in free agency. And I think you'd be looking at the same situation, only worse this winter. So I expect them to push to trade Cole now, but the prices have not come down. I hear that everywhere.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you look at MacPhail and him being out for 3 years and kind of saying, well, I'm going to observe and let Ruben make the deal, but maybe he doesn't feel comfortable with that, and he says, I'm going to hold on to him and wait until I feel more comfortable making an overall decision. Is that something that's a possibility?
It is a possibility. I don't think it's likely, but it's certainly possible. And I kind of alluded to it earlier. Andy's thing is we don't have to trade this guy. He's consistently taken that approach with players like Cole Hamels in the past. If we don't have to trade him, then why would we rush into any deal where we're selling him under optimal return, at under market prices? And it's really all going to depend on how they define what market price is for a guy like Cole. I expect them to find a deal out there. There's certainly enough teams that match up, but again, if Andy's background is if they don't get what they think is right and what they think is fair, it's not going to happen. Not this July.
Jayson Stark's with us here, ESPN.com senior baseball writer. Jay, what did you make? You've been around this team for a long time. It's kind of been a faceless organization in terms of the ownership. David Montgomery, Bill Giles, but not really, this big-time owner who has been a big-time figure. John Middleton came out the other day and really took over the press conference. Was that something to take notice of, or just, hey, he's the guy who's now in that role?
Oh, that didn't just happen. He wanted to appear. He felt he was obliged to appear, and it's funny. I mean, the people in that front office, when he first opened his mouth, they didn't know what he was going to say. They'd never heard him answer a question in public ever before, right? They didn't know what they were going to get. Can you imagine the trepidation they must have felt about this guy sitting there at that podium? But when you listen to him talk, it's obvious that ownership of this team is no longer a passive operation. They're not going to sit back in their beach chairs and let the baseball people, sail the ship. They're going to ask a lot of questions, and they're going to set a tone and establish expectations, and everybody's got to live up to them. The other thing that I thought was really noteworthy was how much John Middleton kept talking about sabermetrics and information and data. And if that's coming from the top, it tells you that, even within the organization, there are people who are not happy with the way the data has been used so far. So the Phillies can spin all they want that people don't know what we do and we use it more than people think. This is John Middleton saying we need to do a lot more, and he's exactly right. The Phillies use it to some extent. They've finally gotten on board. But this was a clear indication that you need to keep up with the competition, and what the good franchises do is stay ahead of the competition. So John Middleton put his stamp all over that press conference and all over this franchise.
Not only that, he did mention something that they're going to create their own sabermetrics thing. What do you make of that? What exactly do you know about that?
Well, I don't know very much. They're very guarded about it, but that's not unusual. That's what the best franchises do. You and I can log on to Baseball Prospectus or Fangraphs or our site or Baseball Reference and come up with lots of cool data. But the really good franchises, the best-run teams, are looking for something beyond that. They're looking for an edge. They're looking for information that no one else has. And they've hired quite a few people now to help make this happen. It's certainly an important sign of where they're heading. And Andy, I thought, said it perfectly. Why would you turn your back on any kind of information? All information is good. All information is important, but the best information is the kind you have that other teams don't have, and they finally got that memo.
Well, you saw what happened out in L.A., and there was a battle there. Obviously, two different philosophies, and one guy resigns. So Ruben's still here. Now, your colleague Keith Law the other day, he explained him, if the Phillies are embracing sabermetrics, he said, Ruben's dead man walking. Would that be accurate? Do you think that is something that he cannot do anything to prove to them that he belongs in that chair next year?
Well, I'm never going to say never. This is the Phillies. But if you listen to Andy MacPhail lay out his vision for the front office, his vision for the franchise, I would say he was not painting a portrait of Ruben Amaro Jr. Is that safe to say?
I don't know that they mentioned his name the whole press conference until they were asked about him. And when they finally got asked about him, Pat looked over to Scott Palmer and was like, "What did they say?"
Well, it's going to be a fascinating dynamic to see where Ruben fits, and whether there is anything that Ruben could possibly do to save his job. I think if you ask Ruben right now, secretly, privately, he would tell you he doesn't expect to be the general manager of this team for the next 20 years or 20 weeks.
Any candidates in mind that are connected to Andy MacPhail? What is next for that position?
Well, you know what? Andy's been on the job for like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So, for anybody to think they know what he's thinking on that front is really jumping the gun. There are a lot of great candidates, and Andy knows everybody. So they'll have no trouble finding somebody young, bright, connected, energetic, if that's what they want. Believe me. And guys with local ties, there's a bunch of them.
Well, that'll be interesting. And then, of course, the next manager. They announced that Pete Mackinnon will stay on board for the rest of the year. Kind of an interesting choice, too, because they originally said, well, he'll go through the weekend. Then it was through the Brewers series. Now he gets the job the rest of the year. Why him over somebody else? And I guess, are there any thoughts on who the next guy at that position could be?
There's a lot of thoughts about that. Now, the first thing that was interesting was that it was Pete Mackinnon and not Larry Boa and not Juan Samuel. And I think in Larry's case, his time to manage this team has come and gone. And they just weren't going to go down that road again. In Juan Samuel's case, little different deal. I think Juan Samuel is a guy they want to keep around here in some role, coach, whatever it is, for a long time. And if you remember, when he was a coach in Baltimore, he was an interim manager for 50 games under, guess who, Andy MacPhail. And then they brought in Buck Showalter, and it caused some bad feelings, and it caused him to want to leave and actually refuse an offer to come think the Phillies were wary of getting into that kind of situation again. So that's why it wasn't those two. And then in Pete's case, he's managed 2,000 games in his career, and he's now a 3-team interim manager, which is quite a claim to fame. He's the Jack McKeon of his time. And I like Pete. And you've already seen that Pete is a breath of fresh air, man. He's smart and honest, and he knows what's going on, and he's not afraid to tell you sometimes what's going on.
Is he auditioning or just keeping the seat warm?
I don't think he expects to get this job. I'm sure he has no expectation to that. There are a lot of names out there. What I think is going to be interesting is, all right, you've heard Ron Gardenhire's name out there. Andy MacPhail knows him well from his days with the Twins, and I know Ron Gardenhire well too. He's a really fun guy. He's a character. He's got some of the likability that Charlie Manuel had. If you hired a guy like him, you'd be getting that. But is he the kind of guy that they want to bring in here and pay like $3 million to manage an outfit that's going to lose 100 games a year for a while? I doubt that seriously. I get the sense there's a lot of impetus inside the organization to try to get younger in a lot of different ways. The manager's job would be the first place they'd start. And so you saw Jim Salisbury speculate about some of the names the other day. Sandy Alomar Jr., definitely a name to watch. Andy has connections with the Alomar family. I would definitely keep your eye on that. Tim Bogar is a guy to watch. He's been a bench coach, been a quality control coach. Cool name, very sharp guy. Joe McEwing is from Philly, a rising managerial star. A guy who I think has great managerial star power. Torey Lovullo, who's John Farrell's bench coach. Extremely smart, imaginative guy. In other words, I think they're going to look for someone who is basically in the position that Terry Francona was in when he first came to the Phillies. A guy whose star was rising, and for that matter, his greatest success might come somewhere else. But I think they're looking for that sort of thing, a young energy, guys who embrace everything that goes with modern managing.
All right, Jay, a couple quick things. Let's get the Utley situation. Obviously, he's on the DL, and at some point, I guess he's going to be ready to come back. Pete Mackinnon said, I like Cesar Hernandez. It almost reminds me like when Chris Ford took over for Randy Ayers of the Sixers a couple of years ago, and that Allen Iverson benched and stuff, trying to make it. He said, look, if you're going to get rid of me, I'm not going to be here anyway. I'm going to do what I want to do. What is the Utley situation? What are you hearing about that?
Well, this one's dicey, and the more I talk to Phillies about people within the Phillies about this, it gets odder by the day. It's clear that everybody was surprised by Chase going on the DL. It's just you don't hear this. They were as surprised by this as they were by the manager resigning. Wow. It's not as if Chase was a guy who was in the trainer's room every day. It wasn't as if he was asking out of the lineup. It really sounds as though he initiated this. So what do you have to wonder, Mike? You have to wonder, all right, why? What was he thinking? And I've heard some theories on it. We'll never know, but one theory is he wanted to get everyone around him off the hook of worrying about that option. I don't know. It's an interesting theory. I find it hard to compute, but it's interesting. The other would be that he felt like he needed a break. He needed a break mentally. He needed a break physically, and he wants to come back after that break and prove he can still play. But in the meantime, you got Cesar Hernandez, who has earned the right to play a lot. Switch hitter who can run, who controls at bats. We don't. I don't know if he's the answer or the second baseman of the future, but he has earned the right to play. So I keep saying, Pete Maccannon's going to show us why he got those big interim manager bucks, isn't he?
Yes, but he's going to have a fun toy to play with in the meantime. Michael Franco had an unbelievable month.
This was Maikel Franco's June. He hit .352 with 8 homers and 24 RBIs. Now, there are a lot of other cool numbers, too, but let's just use those 3 numbers. Only 4 Phillies in the last 50 years have had a month like that. See if you recognize these names: Schmidt, Lazinski, Howard, Abreu. Pretty good, right? And this guy did it in his first full month in the big leagues. And there are only 4 other active players who had a month like that when they were rookies. Pujols was one, Nick Markakis, James Loney, and some guy named Mike Trout.
Wow.
Pretty good. And last night, he starts July with a 3-double game. First 3-double game by a Phillies rookie since Adolfo Phillips half a freaking century ago.
Well, I'll leave you with this. As I saw you tweet earlier about Jose Fernandez energizing the team, and you hear what Franco's doing, and you wonder if the Phillies will just take suit and say, you know what, maybe Nola will just energize us. Do you anticipate seeing him sooner than later, or is that kind of on the back burner now because of all the shakeups up top?
Well, my expectation is when the smoke clears at the deadline and Cole Hamels is somewhere else, that's when you'll see Aaron Nola. And that'll be his promotion will be to try to ease the pain of not having Cole Hamels to go watch every 5 days. And the other problem is, I mean, we've gotten into this. Somebody's got to pitch every one of these games.
Yeah.
There's 80 of them left.
Well, now you need another one with Harang on the DL.
Yeah, well, Chad Billingsley, great to see him again. And I don't know. This is going to be an odd last 3 months, but you know, it's one of those things where you won't be able to take your eyes off the transactions column anyway. All
right, Phillies finish up that 4-game set with Billingsley on the mound tonight. He is on the roster with Harang going on the DL. He's Jayson Stark, brought to you by Team Nissan, the spot where the checker flag drops on Delsey Drive in Violin. Check out all of their new and pre-owned inventory at teamnissan.com. Happy 4th to you, a day for baseball. Jayson Stark.
Have a great holiday, man. Great to talk to you.